Here's a question for you. What would you do if you bought a falling apart house for just $100, and while ripping out a wall you found $3 million in cash? With a note inside that said one word, run? Most people would panic. Some would grab the bags and disappear. I did neither. And what happened next turned my entire life upside down, in ways I never could have imagined. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and 2 years ago I was flat broke, living in a tiny studio apartment in Columbus, Ohio, sleeping on a second-hand mattress I'd bought off Facebook, and eating peanut butter straight from the jar because it was cheaper than making a sandwich. For 6 years, I'd run a small interior design business with my college roommate, Brooke. Then, with zero warning, Brooke quietly dissolved our company, walked off with our entire client list, our vendors, our reputation, everything, and left me holding a non-compete agreement her lawyer had drafted the week before she pulled the plug. I didn't have the money to fight it, so I didn't. My mom kept telling me to move back home. My sister kept emailing me job listings for receptionist positions. I kept telling them I was fine. I was not fine. One night, around 2 a.m., I fell into a YouTube rabbit hole about tax lien property auctions, where local governments sell off houses when the owners stop paying property taxes. Most of these properties are junk. But every once in a while, if a house has enough problems, liens, title issues, a messy history, the starting bid can be shockingly low. The house at 414 Maple Street in a small town called Brookfield, about 40 minutes outside Columbus, checked every one of those boxes. A 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow built in 1931, empty since 2019 when its owner, a man named Walter Higgins, had died with no will and no heirs anyone could find. The minimum bid was $100. The morning of the auction, I was the only person who bid. I drove out that same afternoon. It was October, the trees were that gorgeous burning orange, and honestly that was the only nice thing I could say about the situation. The porch railing had rotted through. A front window was boarded up with warped plywood. The yard was a jungle of dead weeds. But the bones were good. The roofline was straight, the chimney solid, the porch columns original. I walked through with a flashlight and a notepad, and by the time I stepped back outside into that cold October air, I'd already decided I was going to fix this place myself, live in it while I worked, and sell it when I was done. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Exhausting, dirty, completely unglamorous. I tore out bathroom tile and found a rotted subfloor underneath. I pulled kitchen cabinets and discovered old wallpaper, and underneath that, beautiful original woodwork. Then, in the third week, something felt off. I was working on the long interior wall in the dining room, knocking on it the way I always do to check for hidden water damage. The left side sounded normal. The right side sounded normal. But there was a section in the middle about 4 feet wide that sounded different. Not exactly hollow. More like there was something behind it. Something packed in deliberately. I told myself it was probably old insulation. Old houses are full of weird quirks. I told myself that for 3 more days. Then I grabbed my stud finder and ran it across that section. The readings jumped in a way that didn't match insulation at all. It matched something solid with an even density, broken by a seam roughly 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide. A door-shaped seam. I went and sat in my truck for a long time, just staring at the house through the windshield. Maybe in that moment some part of me already knew that whatever was behind that wall was about to change everything, and that there was no version of my life after this that would look like the one before it. I went back inside. I grabbed my pry bar, and I opened the wall. Behind it was a small room, maybe 8 feet by 6, smelling like cedar and something metallic like old coins. There was a single light bulb wired into the house's electrical system, which meant someone had built this on purpose. And stacked against the back wall were 12 identical black duffel bags, filled with more cash than I had ever seen in my life. I didn't count it that night. I couldn't. I just sat on the floor with my back against the door frame, heart pounding, staring at those bags. Eventually I made myself stand up, made myself breathe, and that's when I noticed the envelope. It was sitting on a small wooden shelf, sealed with wax, completely blank. No name. Nothing. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a single card, and on it, in careful handwriting, was one word: run. I didn't run. I want to be honest about that because in the weeks that followed I asked myself 100 times why not. And the answer was always the same: running requires knowing what you're running from. and I didn't know anything yet. All I had was a room full of money, a one-word warning, and a house I'd legally bought for $100. Running felt like giving up on something I hadn't even had a chance to understand. I didn't sleep that night either. I sealed the wall back up as best I could and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I never drank, watching the sky turn from black to gray to that flat, cold white of a November morning. The next day I drove, not to a lawyer, not to the courthouse, but to the Brookfield Public Library. I needed information before I made any kind of move. A librarian named Mrs. Daniels helped me pull old newspaper archives without asking a single nosy question, which I appreciated more than she'll ever know. I spent 4 hours scrolling through 15 years of local papers. Walter Higgins appeared exactly twice, once in 2003, connected to a shell company called Higgins Land Holdings, and once in a 2017 obituary for a man named Edward Lane, described as Higgins's longtime business partner. I wrote down that name. I also wrote down the attorney listed in the old zoning notice, a man named Stephen Wells. The next morning I sat down and counted the money. It took the whole day, stacking and restacking bills, counting everything twice, because precision is the closest thing I have to control when I'm scared. The total came to $3,100,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $3.1 million, hidden in a wall, in a house I'd bought for $100, from a dead man with no heirs. Legally, a complete minefield. The house was mine. What was inside it might be mine too, but that depended entirely on where the money came from and whether anyone else had a legitimate claim to it. And the note that said run told me one very important thing. Someone had hidden this on purpose, which meant someone might come looking for it. I gave myself 3 days to think before doing anything official. My plan had 3 parts. Document everything properly, quietly research where the money might have come from, and find a lawyer outside the county before I told anyone at all. What I didn't know during those 3 quiet days was that someone was already watching the house. The lawyer I found was Patricia Owens, out of a small firm specializing in property law for non-standard situations. I like that phrase. My situation was about as non-standard as it gets. I called her from my truck, parked 2 blocks from the house, because by that point I'd started feeling like the walls themselves were listening. I told her everything. The auction, the room, the money, the note. When I finished, there was a pause. "Are you safe?" she asked. That was not the question I expected. "I think so," I said. "Okay. Don't move the money. Don't tell anyone else. Come see me tomorrow." Patricia was in her late 40s, sharp, the kind of lawyer other lawyers send the messy cases to. After I told her everything again in her office, she leaned back and said, "Here's what you need to understand. If this money was legitimately saved, it's almost certainly yours. If it's proceeds of a crime, the state can claim it, and so can any victims if they're still around." She told me to file an official report with the sheriff's office immediately, not because I legally had to, but because it created a time-stamped record proving I went to the authorities the moment I had a plan. So I did. The deputy who took my statement looked completely out of his depth. He made some calls, and within an hour I was sitting across from Sheriff Dale Watts, a calm, heavy-set man who took it all seriously. He documented the room, photographed everything, logged serial numbers on a sample of bills. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You know what's interesting? We had a tip called in on this address back in 2018. Anonymous. Said there was a large amount of cash stored here. We searched, found nothing, closed it out." He paused. "Looks like we missed something. Someone had tried to get that money found a year before Walter Higgins died. Which meant someone, not Higgins, someone connected to him, had wanted that money out of his hands. And it hadn't worked." That night, sitting in my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know you found it. Don't do anything stupid." If only I'd known in that moment just how far things were about to escalate. I screenshot it, forwarded it to Patricia, called the sheriff. The next morning, Patricia called back. She traced the ownership of that old shell company. 2 members, Walter Higgins and a man named Edward Lane, the father of a man named Daniel Lane, a commercial real estate developer based in a town called Hartwell. I had my first real connection. And someone out there knew I had it. Patricia moved fast, filing an emergency motion to freeze the money under court supervision, and flagging the threatening text to the prosecutor's office. The text had come from a burner phone, which told us this wasn't some panicked, spur-of-the-moment thing. Someone had a plan ready to go. Patricia advised me to leave the house entirely for a while, and I didn't argue. I wasn't being reckless. I was scared and I was being careful. Research on Daniel Lane turned up a 2015 lawsuit, a pattern of shell companies opened and closed, and, of course, a lawyer. Stephen Wells. The exact same Stephen Wells from the old zoning notice. The same name I'd instinctively decided not to contact. My gut had been right. Patricia laid out her theory over coffee. Higgins and Edward Lane had run some kind of cash-based business together, something that generated money that couldn't just be deposited in a bank. When Edward Lane died in 2017, his son Daniel would have expected to inherit his father's share. If Higgins refused to acknowledge any arrangement, Daniel would have been stuck. You can't sue someone over money you can't legally explain. So maybe he called in that anonymous tip in 2018, hoping police would find it and he could swoop in as an interested party. It didn't work. Then Higgins died in 2019. The house sat empty for 2 years. And then I showed up and bought it for $100. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number. Patricia had told me to document every contact, so I answered. A smooth, careful voice. Miss Carter. My name is Daniel Lane. I think we should talk. I said nothing. That money belonged to my father's business partner. There's a private agreement entitling my family to half of it. I'm not asking for anything that isn't mine. I'm asking you to be reasonable. Call my attorney, I said and hung up. I'd been recording calls since the threatening text. I forwarded it to Patricia immediately, then sat on the edge of my motel bed and let myself shake. Exactly 5 minutes, the deal I'd made with myself. 5 minutes of fear, then back to work. He'll escalate, Patricia warned. He has no claim he can bring to court without exposing himself, so he'll try other ways. Be ready. She was right. 3 days later I came back to grab some tools and found the back door wide open. Nothing was stolen, but someone had gone through my files, my notes, my purchase paperwork. They were looking for something. Sitting in a diner afterward with the biggest coffee they had, it hit me. Daniel had mentioned a private agreement. If it existed, and if I found it, it could either help his claim or completely expose what his father's business actually was. I didn't have it. But now I knew to look. I took 3 days off like I promised myself I would whenever things got too heavy. I slept, watched bad movies, ate too much delivery pizza, and called my sister just to talk about nothing. Then I went back to work, searching methodically room by room, the way someone careful enough to hide $3 million in a wall might also hide a piece of paper. I found it on a Wednesday in the attic, tucked inside an old vinyl record sleeve in a box of albums against the wall. 4 handwritten pages, dated 2001, signed by Walter Higgins and Edward Lane. A partnership agreement for what they called a cash facilitation service. In plain English, money laundering. And buried in the legal language was the detail that changed everything. If either partner died, the arrangement dissolved and everything reverted to the surviving partner, not to heirs. Edward Lane died in 2017. His share reverted to Higgins. Higgins died in 2019, with no surviving partner left. The arrangement had simply ended. Daniel Lane had no legal claim to any of it. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I told her. Emily, this changes everything. But it also means the prosecutor is going to be very interested in this document, and how they respond will affect your claim too. There's a path here, she said carefully, where you cooperate fully with the investigation into the laundering operation, and in exchange, your claim as a good faith buyer gets treated sympathetically. Not guaranteed, but real. And Daniel Lane, she added, has spent months trying to recover money he has no legal right to, from a criminal enterprise his own father was part of. The prosecutor's going to want to talk to him too. A few days later, I met with an assistant district attorney named Claire Donovan, sharp, methodical, asked great questions. I handed over everything. The partnership agreement, the photos, the recorded call, the break-in report, the threatening text. Walking out into the pale November sunlight, I called my old friend Megan. I need dinner with a real human who knows my face, I told her. She drove up from Columbus that same night, and we sat in a booth for 3 hours while I told her everything. Not for advice, just so someone who cared about me knew I was still standing. You're terrifyingly competent, she said. I'm just very stubborn, I said. She laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks. They showed up on a Saturday morning. By then I'd moved back into the house. The money was safely in court-supervised escrow, and renovation work continued alongside everything else, because honestly, fixing cabinet hardware was the only thing keeping my brain organized. Through the front window I saw two people on the porch. Daniel Lane, tall, polished, clearly rehearsed, and an older woman with a carefully arranged expression of practiced sympathy. His Aunt Helen. I opened the door. Didn't invite them in. We wanted to clear the air, Daniel said. We feel there's been a misunderstanding. My brother would be heartbroken to see this turn adversarial, Helen added. He and Walter were partners for years. Friends. I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, says more than almost anything. My father put years into that partnership, Daniel continued, voice smooth and reasonable. Legally, I understand it's complicated. But morally, he spread his hands. Surely you can see the right thing as some kind of arrangement. Morally. The word people use when they can't say legally. We're not asking for everything, Helen said, stepping forward like she was offering me a gift. Just a third. A quiet private arrangement. No more legal proceedings. You'd keep the house, keep the majority. Everyone moves on. I looked at them for a long moment. You know what I find morally interesting? I said, voice steadier than I felt. That you're on my porch making this offer the same week your attorney tried to get the partnership agreement thrown out of evidence. Daniel's composure cracked just for a second. Those are separate matters. They're not. If you actually believed you had a moral claim, you'd be making it in court. You're here because your lawyer told you that you can't. Helen's sympathy curdled instantly. You're making a mistake. Daniel has friends in this county, people who've known this family for decades. You're a stranger here. And strangers who make enemies of the wrong people. Helen, Daniel said sharply. Too late. The mask had slipped and we both knew it. I think you should leave, I said. Daniel looked at me with something colder than anger, nodded once, and they walked back to a silver sedan and drove off. I closed the door, heart pounding, hands steady. I'd expected this. The aunt, the moral appeal, the modest ask, but seeing the machinery so plainly, that I hadn't expected. When I told Patricia what Helen had said on the porch, she sounded almost pleased. That's very good for us. An implied threat on your doorstep on top of everything else we've documented? That tells a prosecutor this isn't a sympathetic family. It's a family applying pressure on someone who got in their way. How much longer? I asked. Weeks, not months, she said. We're close. The hearing was in mid-December. By then, the investigation had been running 6 weeks, and Patricia used the kind of careful lawyer language that tells you a lot without saying much. Productive, she called it. Going in, I knew this much. Claire had filed criminal charges against Daniel for harassment and witness intimidation. Stephen Wells's motion to exclude the partnership agreement had been denied, and a forensic accountant had spent a month tracing serial numbers on the cash, cross-referencing them against bank records. Some of the money traced back to clean transactions. Some traced back to what the report dryly called structured cash deposits associated with known illegal enterprises. Some clean, some dirty. I sat in that hearing room in a second-hand blazer I'd pressed carefully the night before, and I was calm, not performed calm, but the real thing, the kind that comes from having done everything you possibly could. Daniel sat across the room with Stephen Wells, dressed perfectly, wearing the expression of a man patiently waiting for a misunderstanding to clear itself up. I'd seen that look before. It's armor. Claire walked the judge through everything: the auction, the discovery, the report, the threats, the break-in, the partnership agreement, the porch visit. Then the forensic findings. And then, something I hadn't seen coming. She called a witness. A retired restaurant owner named Frank Sullivan, 71 years old, testifying under limited immunity about his role in the cash operation run by Higgins and Edward Lane between 2001 and 2016. He named Edward Lane as his contact. He named Stephen Wells as the attorney who drafted the shell company paperwork. Wells went completely still. Then Claire added one more thing. A second, undisclosed witness under immunity had corroborated everything, and provided documentation that Daniel Lane had known about his father's business as far back as 2014, and had personally received an $80,000 payout from it in 2015. Daniel's composure didn't break exactly. but something underneath it did. I watched it happen in real time. The judge directed that the state bar be notified of a potential conflict of interest involving Wells's firm. Wells sat down without finishing his sentence. The months after moved with that particular slow, relentless pace of the legal system. Wells withdrew from Daniel's case within a week, citing conflict of interest. The state bar opened an investigation into his firm. Daniel hired new counsel, but there was no deal to be made. In March, Daniel Lane pleaded guilty to one count of criminally receiving proceeds from an illegal enterprise, the $80,000 from 2015, a $200,000 fine, 18 months of supervised release. No prison time. That part was hard to swallow at first, but Patricia reminded me, for a real estate developer, supervised release and a public criminal record isn't nothing. It's the end of the reputation he'd spent his whole life building. The civil case settled in May. Roughly $900,000, the portion clearly traced to criminal proceeds, was forfeited to the state. The remaining $2.2 million, which couldn't be tied to any traceable crime, was ruled to be lawfully mine, as the legitimate purchaser of the house and its contents. I had to read that determination 3 times before it felt real. I called Patricia from the parking lot and said something completely incoherent, and she just laughed. "You earned every bit of it," she said. I sat there a long time watching the early summer light through the trees, thinking about everything: the motel room, the diner, the attic full of dust, the hearing room, Daniel's frozen face. And that single word on the card: run. Walter Higgins had spent decades building something he must have known would eventually catch up with him. He couldn't escape it himself. It was too tangled into who he'd become. But at the end, some human part of him left a warning anyway. Don't let this trap you the way it trapped me. I didn't run, but I didn't let fear make my choices either. I documented everything, trusted the right people, and took it one step at a time. That's really the whole lesson. Not bravery, just stubborn, methodical refusal to be pushed around. I finished renovating the house the following October, almost exactly 1 year after that first strange knock on the wall. I'd planned to sell it, fix it, flip it, move on. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a project and became mine. I'd torn it down to the bones and rebuilt it with my own hands, and I knew every inch of it. With the settlement, I started fresh. A new design and renovation business, no partners, no one's name on it but mine. Within a year, I had 4 clients. Within 12, I paid off my mom's mortgage, something I dreamed about for 15 years. She cried. So did I. My sister, the one who used to send me job listings, took me to dinner and told me she'd never doubted me for a second. I let her believe that. Daniel Lane sold his house and left the county by the following spring. His development company collapsed within a year, financing pulled, partners walking away, the natural consequence of getting caught. I didn't celebrate it, but I didn't lose sleep over it either. Wells's law license was suspended pending a full ethics review. The maple tree in front of the house still turns orange and red every October. I sat on the porch one evening with a glass of wine, looking down the street, thinking about what it really means to start over. Not the fantasy version, clean slate, fresh start, leave it all behind. The real version, the one that carries the weight of everything that happened, and is better for carrying it. I bought a house for $100. I found $3 million in a wall. I was threatened, broken into, and lied to by people with more money and more connections than I had. And I'm still here. So tell me, what would you have done? Found $3 million in your wall, gotten a threatening text, a stranger on your porch making moral arguments. Would you run? Would you fight? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stuck with you, hit subscribe. Thanks for listening.